All right. Thank you for everybody joining. My name is Eric Velasquez. I've been interviewing a lot of the candidates here in city of San Antonio just to kind of get a better perspective on them. But what I'm doing today is I am trying to hold this type of class, I guess, so to say, on how to properly understand your property appraisal. I know a lot of you have already received a lot of those in the mail, and also how to protest. So, um, without further ado, and also this is streaming on the Vista neighborhood page, which I am also a board member for the Vista Neighborhood Association. So, yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and bring in our guest here. Hello, how are you guys?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. Make sure everybody can hear. Okay. Go ahead and introduce yourselves.
So my name is Michael Amezquita. I'm the Chief Appraiser of the Bear Appraisal District. I've been here about 18 years and happy to be with you today.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm Roy Sandoval, an Assistant Chief Appraiser at the Bear Appraisal District. I also have been here a little over 18 years.
Awesome. So the biggest thing that people want to know is, what is this envelope that they received? If they haven't been paying attention, and what do we do? Like, what's the whole point of understanding what this letter that you get in the mail? What is that?
You want to start us, Roy, with the values? Or?
Sure. Can we start with the first slide, Jared?
Which one?
Start the PowerPoint.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And go to the next. Okay, so I'm glad that you said that this is going to be a class, because a lot of the times people have a misconception of what we do here at the Bear Appraisal District. And the Appraisal District basically has two roles and two responsibilities that are required by law. We have to appraise property at market value, and we also have to administer exemptions. So what you see here on the right is a copy of a 21, or an example of what people have been receiving in the mail the last couple of weeks. We sent out over 650,000 value notices, and they hit the mailboxes right around the 1st of April. And this is a copy of our notice. We can go to the next slide, sir.
Okay.
And on the left-hand side here, we have a little breakdown, zoomed in on the section of the notice where it actually shows exactly what our responsibilities are. Like I told you, the appraisal district has to appraise property, and as you can see right there in the blue box, it says the 2021 proposed appraised value is $88,100, and the second box is the exemption amount. That's what the appraisal district is responsible for. If you look further down where you see the 2020 tax rate, those tax rates are set by the city, school, county, all the other municipalities that collect money for their services. Those are the tax rates that those counties, that those units have to calculate. The last part is the estimated tax amount. So the tax collector collects the taxes, the taxing units set the tax rates, and again, the appraisal district is only responsible for the appraisal and the exemptions. Now, one of the points that I'd like to make to your listeners is that what the appraisal district does by law is required, and there's no discretion as to what our job is. We have to follow the market as best we can. There's no discretion in that. What a willing buyer is willing to pay a willing seller, that sets the market value. The discretion part comes in the tax rates, because the tax rates are discretionary depending on what the taxing units need for their services. So you would think that as property values go up, those tax rates would be able to come down to still collect the same amount of revenue as they did the year prior. So I just wanted to kind of go over what the exact responsibilities is for the appraisal district, because like your listeners, what you were saying earlier, we have a big misconception of what we do here. So right. The first thing I'd like to point out is for those people that have had their notices in hand, and if you are choosing to protest your value, which we encourage, we want to make sure that the first thing that you realize is that the protest deadline is typically May 15th. However, this year, May 15th falls on a Saturday, so the homeowners will have until May 17th to file their deadline, their protest deadline. So that's really, really important that your listeners know that May 17th is the actual protest deadline. How do you submit a protest? You can do it the old-fashioned way. You mail it in. You can email it to us directly at protests@bcad.org, or on our website, we have an e-file system where a person can go in there and file a protest, or they can also choose to handle their protest online, the whole protest online. And what they do is they'll submit their protest with whatever evidence they feel would justify a value reduction. Our staff will review that and make any kind of offer as far as a value adjustment, all online. Now, if a homeowner wants to have that physical interaction or the contact, telephonically or by Zoom, we would ask them to file the e-file. So it's really, really important that the May 17th deadline not be forgotten, because if they miss the deadline, they have to, once the deadline is missed, the appraisal district loses authority to grant you a hearing. So what the property owner has to do is they have to submit a letter in writing to the appraisal review board chair, who will review the information as to why the deadline was missed, and then only she will be able to grant or deny that request. So it's really, really important that everybody that chooses to protest not miss that deadline. We can go to the next slide.
And I just want to touch on that topic there. Yeah, because I actually did miss my protest hearing. I did have to email, like you were saying, and it took a while for that to get the response back. Is there anything in the future that you guys will be able to do to send out emails of your hearing? Because the reason why I missed it is because I never received the actual letter of when my protest date was, and so but I got an email saying that my protest was closed. So I was just wondering if there's any way that we can do it to where you can send emails out to the public when your actual protest hearing is. Oh, sorry. Hold on. I have
There's
you on
some
mute.
legislation right now that may make that a possibility in the future. One of the problems that the appraisal district has, and you may or may not know something about this, but when you mass mail things, you can easily get tagged as spam, and then it just creates a real multitude of issues in terms of trying to get untagged and find a workaround to get around that. Currently under law, if a taxpayer wishes to receive electronic communications, you simply have to say so in writing, and then we make an agreement between ourselves. You provide us with the access information. Not very many people do that. I think we're in a position where we could probably pull that off, although it may well, after this session, become a matter of law for us to make those agreements.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I mean, so how do we do that? Because I definitely want to do that, because, like I said, I missed it because I didn't receive it. So how do we do that if we want to?
Well, the first thing it requires is for you to make a request to have all your communications sent electronically. That'll cover your notice, that'll cover your scheduling letter, that'll cover your decision from the review board, all those things, so that you'll receive it. And then it's incumbent upon you to give us, obviously, a good email address so that we can both sign off and agree to that. It's, everything in the tax code is predicated upon the chief appraiser. Well, obviously, it's going to be me or one of my staff is going to make that agreement with you, and then we'll get you logged into the system so that as your schedule comes up, you'll start receiving those communications electronically. I'm not exactly sure, to be honest with you, because this is kind of new territory for us. I believe that's available to individual homeowners. For some time now, we've been able to do it with business personal property. So just go ahead and send me that email at the end of our program. I think the last slide has all of our contact information. That's my direct email, Roy's direct email, or you can just submit it to our customer service at bcad.org and clearly put on there that you just want to receive all your notices electronically.
Okay, great. I just want to remind, I have each of us muted just so that way there's not too much of an echo. So if you are talking, please bear with me. I'll unmute you. But just real quick, can you tell people how they can get their ePIN if they don't not have their ePIN on their appraisal form?
The e-pin should be on the notice. If it's a new owner, we just have them email me, and I'll make sure to get that information to them. But the majority of the people that already have those accounts will have that e-pin on published on their notice.
Okay. And I asked that because I had a neighbor who had that issue. He's been a homeowner for a while there at the same property, but he never had an e-pin. I just told him to contact your office, and then they set up an e-pin for him. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. Real quick, Kuka asked, what kind of evidence do you need? I'm assuming we're gonna go into the next slides.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So we'll get into that. And then Josie says some military are exempt from property tax. Is there any reason to protest your appraisal being exempt?
Mike, you want that one?
Well, all I'm going to say about that is some of the slides later talk about exemptions, and we're going to talk about that. If you're a 100% disabled veteran and you have the 100% disability awarded to you by the VA, and you've given us that information and taken care of your filing of the 100% disabled veterans here at the Bear Appraisal District, either through the mail or online or whatever the case may be, then by all means, you don't really need to protest. But at the same time, I have over 65 seniors who have basically very little or no tax liability because they qualified so long ago. But I always encourage them to file a protest so that they keep the value in line, so that whenever they pass and their heirs take on that ownership of that property, they don't inherit something with an erroneous value on it. So, it kind of depends on every person's situation.
That's a good point. Lisa says, I've lived in my home since June of 1998, no e-pin. So yeah, definitely email or call BCAD and ask them for an e-pin. And they can talk to anybody, correct?
I didn't hear that.
Well, they can talk to anybody there at the BCAD office, or
yeah, especially about the PIN. And if you're concerned about calling, we actually just before the pandemic struck, we took our office from 40 incoming phone lines to 120 incoming phone lines. I only have 160 employees when we're fully staffed, so there shouldn't be a real problem getting through. But if you do experience problems, if you'll just put your PID number, that's your account number that's on your notice, and your name, address, a telephone number, and email it to us at cs@bcad.org. That's the actual department that will send you that PIN number.
Gotcha.
And I really want to highlight that we need to find as many of those as we can, Roy, because I haven't heard this complaint before.
Oh, yeah.
I want to know why that's happening.
Yeah, definitely. So Kathy says, can you clarify the 65 exemption? Will you go into that later?
Yeah, we've got a slide for all that.
Great, cool. And then Jen says, protest is necessary to keep home value in line for estate purposes.
That's true.
And then such as a tax frozen or okay. So I'm assuming we'll get to that here later. So let me go ahead next slide here. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so Roy was talking about the market, and while we collect a lot of sales data during the appeal season, we also send out, we had almost 30,000 deed transfers last year in Bexar County. So as those deed transfers occur, we automatically send a sales request letter to both the buyer and the seller to try to ascertain what properties are selling for. Texas is a non-disclosure state, so you don't have to tell us, but by the same token, we're not members of MLS. So we don't get that information. What this slide shows you is it's aggregate data looking at the average market value of a homestead versus the average sale price of a homestead in Bexar County. The top line, it's also reported by the Real Estate Center at Texas A&M University. SABOR does this as well. But if you'll look, since 2013 all the way up until 2020, all you see is a steady increase in average sale price. And right below that, the green line, is where the Bear Appraisal District's numbers fall on average for a homestead. As that number creeps up, yes, values are going up, but obviously we're still trailing the market. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, at the end of February, the average sale price of a home in Bexar County had now eclipsed $300,000. So, you maybe go to the next slide and we'll keep talking about this. So here we're looking at the average sale price by year by county. And so really what I wanted to give folks was an opportunity to see how we compare with the 5 largest metros in Texas. And at the very top is Austin. Their average sale price now is over $500,000. So nobody can afford to live there. But the truth of the matter is at the very bottom is San Antonio. And so while ours continues to increase, it's not going up nearly as fast as Fort Worth, Dallas, Houston, and certainly not Austin. The next slide will also show you that the median level of value of residential sales prices, again, Austin far and away the most expensive, and San Antonio at the very bottom bringing up the most affordable. And I realize that affordability is a relative term. Are you employed? Well, if you're not, then nothing seems affordable. But when we look in relation to what the market is doing, San Antonio values are still relatively inexpensive compared to the rest of the state. And the next slide. You want to take over again, Roy?
Yes, sir. So now that we've talked about how crazy the market is, not just in Bexar County, but throughout the state, we want to talk about the reasons that people can protest. Now, the majority of the reasons, the majority of the protests that we receive there's twofold. It's it's an incorrect appraisal, which is they think that based on the sales in the neighborhood, they should be, valued lower, or the value is unequal with others, which we call equity. So Eric and I live on the same street. We have the same size house. His value is significantly lower than mine. If all things are equal and all things are the same, we should have relatively the same value. So we always encourage people to check off 2 boxes, which is the market and the equity. That way they have 2 different approaches to their appeals, the sales and then also the equity. Now, when you send in this information, we touched on it earlier, it's really, really important that you provide us with a good email address and also a good phone number, because like we did last year, our doors are shut to the public. So we've conducted all our hearings virtually, telephonically, or by email. So that's the best way to make sure that we have that communication flowing. One of the things that we want to point out, and we put those 3 red boxes, is when you send in your protest, we encourage everybody to check off that box that says evidence requested. So what that does, that asks us, or that forces us to send you all the information that we used on how we arrived at your value. And more importantly, like I told you to check off the equity box, we also send you a report of your neighborhood with your home in the middle, and you have the 50 larger properties and the 50 smaller properties, and you see the valuations of all of those. So if you live in a fairly homogeneous neighborhood, if you have 1,000 square foot house, you want to look at that 1,000 square foot range and see if you're in line with everybody. If there's some there that are significantly lower, you may have a case as far as lowering your value based on equity. So you have to be sure to check off that box. And the reason that we say that to check it off is because it wasn't up until a couple of years ago that we could just send you the information if you requested it. Now we're required to only send it to you if the property is under an appeal. So once you file that protest, check the box off, and we'll send you all the data that you have. More importantly, also, it limits the appraisal district from being able to present any new evidence at your informal hearings or your formal hearings. So if we find out that there are several sales in their neighborhood that came in after the fact that are indicating a higher value, we're not allowed to use that because we've already presented all the evidence ahead of time. So that's what limits us. On the flip side, if you, the homeowner, are aware of homes that sold after the fact that also help, prove your case for a lower value, by all means, you can submit, you can present those at your hearing. So it's really, really important, and we encourage you to check off that evidence packet so we can make sure that you have all our information ahead of time. Okay, next slide, sir.
The biggest thing that I've been telling people as well is you guys don't know what's wrong with the home itself inside. you guys only see what's on the outside and from Google Photos or whatever. So they always forget that you guys don't see that, so you're just going off of what you see on the outside, correct?
That's a very good point, Eric, because we have an appraisal staff of about 55 appraisers, and we have over 650,000 homes. So you're right, we don't look at your home individually, we look at your neighborhood. So what we do, we collect sales data and say in this specific neighborhood, from last year to this year, sales are indicating this neighborhood went up 20% based on those sales. So you as a homeowner, this is why we encourage you to protest, because the informal hearing is when you can bring those repair estimates, you can bring in those issues that affect your home's valuation to our forefront, so we can address those. Because you're right, we don't appraise individual houses, we do mass appraisal. So this is the time when a homeowner will bring to our attention what repairs are needed, what damages are going on through the house that require that adjustment downward. So it's really, really important for them to do that. Absolutely. And we'll talk about evidence in another slide.
Now, real quick question, which it's kind of a serious issue. What if somebody is afraid that let's say, for example, if for some reason a person thinks their home is unlivable because of all the things that are wrong with their home, they don't want to do this and protest their property taxes. They're afraid of some type of backlash that they'll get from that. Is that a genuine worry, or is that kind of something that people should even think about?
I've never had an issue like that as far as somebody facing any backlash. We want to, at the fair appraisal district, like I said, we appraise property, but we want to make sure we have a fair appraisal. So if Eric's house has significant issues that we haven't addressed, we want to make sure that value is correct based on what those issues are, so that you're paying your fair share. We don't want you to say your house is worth $200,000 when you have foundation issues, damages, anything that's going to subtract the value. So I encourage people, please bring in whatever you feel would help, give us a better idea of what's wrong with that house in relation to the sales. Because again, we look at sales data and say, okay, this is what this neighborhood did as far as from last year to this year. But when you're looking at a 20% increase, we apply that 20% increase to the neighborhood. It's up to the individuals to bring us specific characteristics of their property so we can make those adjustments downwards.
Gotcha. All right. Let me bring this up here. Lisa says, in 2004, I refinanced my home after a divorce. I included all the paperwork required for the refinance through my lending company and through the city. Last year, my property taxes went way up because they were requiring paper verification from my divorce, and I had already submitted it in 2004. Is that something that you guys can suggest on anything, or?
I would have to look. I would recommend that Lisa would call me so we can look at her property specifically, because we're talking about something that happened 17 years ago. So what happened 17 years ago as far as sales is not going to be the same as what's going on now. We want to make sure we're looking at current information. And if there's any other specifics that she wants to bring to our attention, well, we can address that also. Like I said, all our contact information is at the end. We can, talk about that.
Jennifer's got her in the chat box.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
Let's go on to the next slide.
Yeah, definitely. And what I'm going to do is we'll kind of hold off on some of these questions real quick, but we'll let you guys look at the slides.
Okay, so once we get the protest, what happens? Once we protest it, you're going to receive a notice in the mail that has instructions on how to use our self-scheduling system. We have a system that we used last year for the first time called the appointee system, which allows homeowners that want to file a protest to set the date and the time when our staff will contact them. So this alleviates the problem of them having to take time off of work, come down to fight traffic, find parking. I mean, the self-scheduling system has worked out really, really well for us. And we also have Zoom, WebEx available meetings. We can do our informals over the phone or just basically by email. So all these different methods and platforms that we can use to handle the property appeals, the informals. And then if you protested your file on using the e-file, like I told you earlier, that will be all done online. And our website has tutorials on how to use the e-file system, whether you want to just file the protest itself or whether you want to do the online appeal. Last year, we had a record volume of appeals. We had 131,000. 80-some thousand of those were residential, and we had a 94% settlement rate, which means more than 9 times out of 10, if a property owner brought us some issues, we came to a resolution. Now, the 6% that didn't come to a resolution, those had to proceed to the formal hearing, which is the Appraisal Review Board. If we don't have a resolution, you go to the formal hearing, you will get information on how to set up your hearing there. And again, the ARB, they're also trying to conduct as many hearings as they can by phone, by Zoom, or by WebEx. But for those people that feel adamant about having an in-person formal hearing, those will be scheduled and granted, but those will be at a later date. And that's all due to the pandemic right now that we have. Now, let's talk about evidence. You know, this is always something that we really, really want to encourage, because people say, well, what evidence do I need? We have photographs. Like I was telling you, if there's any specific issues with your home, photographs are very, very telling because it shows the damage. Repair estimates are even better because they actually put a dollar amount to the damages that you have. So photographic evidence, estimates. We also have comparative market analysis. You can go to realtors out there and say, hey, you know what? I want to know what properties are selling for and listing for in my neighborhood. They'll run you reports where you can have that data. You can bring it to us, or show it to one of our appraisers so we can go over that. If you recently purchased your property, the best piece of evidence is going to be what you paid for. Now, if we send you a value notice and it's lower than what you paid for, I wouldn't protest. But if it's higher than what you paid for, that would be the first piece of evidence I would present. And ultimately, anything that you feel would support a value reduction. In 22 years, the question that I hear more and more of is, well, what's the limit that you can do informally as far as an adjustment? The only thing we're limited to is the evidence that's presented. So if we have Eric's house as 2,000 square feet and it's only 1,000, we're going to make that right, because again, we want to make sure that our records are correct and that our value is correct based on all the evidence. So anything that you feel would support your value reduction, by all means, please submit it.
And I do want to add that any photographs, you would have to upload them to the website or the where your protest. What is it called? What is it called? Online portal.
Yes.
Online portal, because you guys will not be able to take photographs just like on your phone or anything like that, right? Okay.
Mike,
Okay, so here we go with the exemptions. So really and truly, your homestead exemption, that's a state mandatory exemption that's applied to your school district taxes. Some of our local jurisdictions offer a local option exemption as well. By and large, it's a $25,000 discount off of your appraised value. So if you have a $100,000 home, you're only paying taxes on $75,000 because you have a $25,000 homestead exemption. That's really not the most important thing. That exemption amounts to, depending on what school district you're in, anywhere from $250 to $300 in savings annually, and that's a good thing. But the most important thing about your homestead exemption is it limits you to a 10% increase from one appraisal to the next. And since the market has been so volatile in San Antonio for the last several years, we find ourselves reappraising every year. So if you're in one of those neighborhoods where your house was $100,000 in 2020, and now it's almost $200,000 in 2021, you're not going to pay tax. I still have to estimate the actual market value at 200 or whatever the number is, but you're only going to pay tax on 110 because that's 10% over last year's value, and then 121 the next year, and then 133 the next year, 10% every year. And so it seems arbitrary, but it's a way to limit the increases in highly appreciating neighborhoods for longtime homeowners. Now, one of the things that we talked about earlier, or was asked about, was the over 65 exemption. San Antonio has distinguished itself, San Antonio and Bexar County, from other major metros in Texas, in that I like to call them the big four taxing jurisdictions. Normally, the over 65 would only apply to your school taxes. Here in San Antonio, It applies to the school, the city, the county, and the community college district. That's the bulk of your tax bill. San Antonio River Authority, it doesn't apply to them, and that's a very small tax. It doesn't really amount to much. University Health Systems is another tax that we pay here. They don't freeze, but they do give a $10,000 additional homestead exemption. Now, the importance of that over 65 is if you were a homeowner who filed a homestead exemption prior to the time you turn 65, and I have your driver's license or your Texas ID on file, and I know your birth date, on your birth date, I'm supposed to automatically grant you an over 65 exemption. I'm supposed to track you in our system, and we do. This year, we did it over 4,600 times. So we're very interested in getting all of our senior citizens all of their exemptions. The other thing is, if you're a qualified person who's over 65 and you've qualified for this exemption and you pass, your surviving spouse, provided they're at least 55, get to keep that exemption. They don't have to wait until they turn 65, provided they don't remarry. They get to keep that exemption. The disabled persons, obviously that's kind of self-explanatory. If you have an SSI disability or a VA disability where you've been afforded so much disability, you're very possibly entitled to that exemption. It's very similar to the over 65, except that you can't have both. It's one or the other. So if you're under 65 and you're disabled, obviously that's the one for you. And then, here again, all of these exemptions that are on the homestead application, which all of these are, previous to the 2017 session, I believe, we could only look back 1 year. And so now we can look back 2 years. So if you owned your home in 2019 and didn't file for a homestead exemption, or you're over 65 or you're disabled persons, I could actually grant it to you because you're eligible for it this year. And then I can look back to 2020 and 2020 and 2019. And so here's where the real benefit of that cap comes into play. We go back, let's say that you're in one of those neighborhoods that's escalating like crazy, like so many of them are in San Antonio. We can go all the way back to 2019 to establish your cap looking forward, which could be a huge tax savings. It could be a couple $3,000 in savings annually, depending on how much appreciation is going on. Now, with respect to disabled veterans exemptions, we have a disabled 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that's basically based on your level of disability as assigned by the VA. And so unlike the homestead, unlike the over 65, and unlike the disabled persons, disabled veterans 1, 2, 3, or 4 can be applied to any property you own. So let's say you're an over 65 person and you're maxed out on your homestead. You don't need any more exemptions there, but you have a little rent house over here. You can apply your DV 1, 2, 3, or 4 to that rent house. And so essentially the lowest level, I think it's 30% or less, gets you to like $5,000, and the next level is $7,500, $10,000, and $12,000. Now, here's the big one: the 100% disabled veterans exemption with a surviving spouse. If you have been awarded 100% disability by the VA and you're unable to work and you're service connected, you don't pay taxes in Texas anymore, not property taxes. And if that person who qualified passes and their surviving spouse is at least 55 years of age, they get to keep that exemption. Here again, provided they don't remarry. The donated residence of a partially disabled veteran, that's a relatively new one. That one is more complicated. We don't really see that many of them. It has to come from a qualified charity. They can't charge you more than 50% of the actual market value if it wasn't 100% donated. And then your disability rating is going to be the basis for how much exemption you get on whatever value is taxable on that. Now, on the right-hand side, all of these exemptions require you to have a matching driver's license or a Texas ID that matches the address for the property that you're applying for an exemption. That's a matter of law. That's not our policy. The last thing on this slide is there are no fees for our services for filing these exemptions. We actually have an online homestead exemption portal. And so the reason I say that is we have a company out of Plano called Refund Advisory Corp. And back in the day, 20 years ago, these companies would charge $20 to file your homestead exemption. Well, as time moved on, that got to be $35 and then $50. Well, now they want 50% of the tax savings. So think about this. This is where it gets really disgusting. So Eric qualifies for his homestead exemption in 2019, but he doesn't apply until 2021. He's in one of those neighborhoods that's moving up $40, $50, $60, $100,000 a year. So we go back to 2019 and we cap your value to where you're not seeing those great big increases. So the amount of tax savings is huge. If you're paying $3,000 in taxes on a $100,000 home, and you should be paying $6,000 on a $200,000 home, and I'm just using numbers out loud here. Well, they want half of that tax savings they just gave you. And by the way, when you sign up with them, not only are you agreeing to pay them, but you're agreeing to forego your refund so that the tax office has to send it directly to them. They keep their part, and then they pay you your part. So trust me, it may not be illegal, but it sounds pretty unethical. And I'm just telling you, if you need something notarized, anything along those lines, I have notaries. We'll do that for you for free. We don't want to keep anybody from getting their homestead exemption. We want to help you get your exemptions because it makes our job easier and it saves the taxpayer a lot of money the sooner we get those folks qualified.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Out for exactly what specific names would they go by?
I'm sorry, I missed that, Eric.
What specific names would those people go by, or groups that would do that? Just that way people can be on the lookout.
Well, they're going to send you a flyer in the mail. There's still a few of these companies around that simply want a $50 donation from you and they'll file your paperwork. These guys, it's Refund Advisory Corp out of Plano, Texas. They're very aggressive in their mail outs. We pointed it out to the legislature. They don't think it's illegal. They're not going to stop business from doing business. I'm just warning taxpayers. There's no exemption you can apply for in the state of Texas that requires you to use an outside service and pay for it. Every appraisal district in Texas is required to give you your exemptions. And if you're having trouble with any appraisal district around us or my appraisal district, contact me. I'll be happy to reach out to that chief appraiser and make sure they understand what the law requires them to do. And I think we're ready to move on to the next slide.
Yes. Real quick, Jen says, did you say that you could not have an over 65 exemption and a disability exemption at the same time?
That's correct. It's one or the other. And so obviously if you're not over 65, you want the disabled person's exemptions if you do have a disability rating. And if you are over 65, well then by all means get that over 65 exemption. They're somewhat duplicative, and I mean they're almost identical in terms of benefit. Just one is age specific while the other one is not. It's disability specific.
Gotcha.
Okay, and so we talked a little bit about the homestead increase and the limitation on caps. So on the far right-hand side, you see there the 15% arrow. That's the market value increasing from 184 to 210 from one year to the next, while the actual taxable value only goes up 10% from 184 to 202. It's just the market is really driven by what's going on in your own neighborhood, what similar homes are selling for. One of the things Roy said earlier, and I want to be very clear about this, we do value neighborhoods at a time, so it's not individual property specific, but the law does require us to look at individual characteristics that your home may have in the way of an attribute or as a negative to value. And so it's important for people to participate in this protest. I don't like that word, particularly in these days and times, because it's not really like that. It's really more about trying to get to the right value and making sure people aren't paying more than their fair share of taxes. In that case, all I can tell you, Eric, is we have drug houses, we have halfway houses, we have all kinds of houses all over town. It's going to depend on what other homes are selling for in your neighborhood. Just having a drug house or a halfway house or doesn't necessarily adversely impact your value. But if the market says it does, The next neighborhood over doesn't have that, and they're selling for a lot more money. Well, then that's definitely a good argument. If you've listed your property, Roy was talking about properties that have sold, or if you recently purchased. If you recently listed your property and you listed it for sale for something less than what the appraisal district had on it, in my mind, as long as it was an open listing and listed and available for sale to anybody, if it was out there for at least 90 to 120 days, I'd say that's good evidence that it's not worth any more than that because it didn't sell for that. So that too could be a good piece of evidence. And here again, the homestead apportionment. If your home or property is rented and not used for residential purposes, you have a business that you're operating out of your home. You have a leased duplex where you live in one side and you rent the other. If that's the case, you're only entitled to an exemption on half of that property. That's kind of what that homestead apportionment is all about. Here again, a lot of us are having to work from home these days. That's not the kind of business we're talking about. We're talking about, you have a tattoo parlor in the back room of your house, or you have an accounting business or an attorney business in the back of your home, and the rest of it is your homestead. That apportionment is the amount that you're eligible to claim a homestead on. The business part would not be. Next slide.
Priscilla just said, I'm not a homeowner yet. We're renting a house that needs a lot of repairs. Does the property value determine the cost of rent besides location? Does the city approve properties before they can be listed up for rent? I realize this isn't what you're discussing, but thank you.
Wow, that was a little bit out of my pay grade. I don't know what the city's role is in how they monitor rental units. I do know that oftentimes property that has rental property in the area, sometimes those things can be a deterrent to value. Sometimes they're exclusively rental property neighborhoods. My granddaughter lives in one of those in Austin. We kind of already covered the property tax ceiling freeze. This slide was presented to you so that you can share with the rest of the folks in your neighborhood who may not have caught this broadcast. And of course, they can always reach out to us with questions. Next slide. Okay, so a lot of people like to talk about keeping taxpayers in their homes. If you are a person who is at least over 65 or disabled, a disabled veterans exemption on file, any of those things, if you're having trouble paying your taxes, there's something called a tax deferral affidavit. I personally don't like this just because I think it keeps people from getting generational wealth. And that seems to happen more with minority communities. If there's a way to hang on to your home and pay your taxes and keep it all up to snuff, great. But if you're in one of those situations where you've been unemployed or you can't go back to work and you can't pay your taxes and you're over 65 or you have a disability exemption or a VA exemption, it's possible you would qualify for this. The TDA basically provides that once you receive it, you apply for it here with my office. We send the information over to the county. It stops all penalties and lowers the interest rate, I believe, from 8% to 5% on any unpaid portion of the taxes. It will postpone the payment of those taxes. It doesn't. It protects against the foreclosure or forced sale due to unpaid property taxes, but it doesn't extinguish the tax. It continues to accumulate. So whenever that person passes, the persons who would inherit the home would either have to pay those taxes or the property will be sold to satisfy the existing tax lien. So
right, it's I think that's kind of similar to like your mortgage payment deferrals and all those things. Like you don't want to get into those because then that just means you're going to end up owing more and more money later on.
That's exactly right.
At
the same time, I kind of think the kids ought to be helping their parents if they're in that situation.
Yeah. Saying I missed the page, but I think I skipped the page.
No,
I don't see one.
I think that's it. So if there's more questions, happy to answer those.
Definitely some questions. Let me go back. Thank you guys for here. Let's see here. Let me go back. Sorry. How do I determine Class CD correct? I assume SB means siding brick?
Stone brick.
Stone brick.
Right. That by our classifications is if the house has at least 70% stone brick, it doesn't have to be completely, but that's how we determine the exterior for that.
Okay. Where are some resources sites where I can gather evidence to submit for a protest?
There's a lot of websites out there right now. There's Redfin, there's HomeSnap, there's Trulia. Like I said, there's also realtors that you could go to and ask for a competitive market analysis where they will look at your immediate area and tell you what property they're selling for and also what they're listed for. You can then look at what your property, the size of your property, and compare it to those, and that'll give you a good basis as far as what would be a fair market value. You can bring that and see how it relates to the value that we have, and then we can make those adjustments to try to come up with a mutual median that we can both agree on.
Hey, Eric, we also have on our BCAD website, we have a third-party state controller publishes a how to protest your property value. And it's the same, it's Glenn Hager's office in Austin. It's just a hot link that takes you straight to it and shows you how to exactly go about filing and collecting evidence and creating a protest. Likewise, we have our own who we are, what we do, and how to file your protest. And then we also maintain a presence on Facebook and Twitter where there's a lot of local information about different neighborhoods where you can go and find out all that information just following us online.
Okay. Where at exactly? Where was it at? Down here?
Okay, so down in here, there's some videos that are linked right there, right next to it.
Okay.
There you go.
And those are all free, by the way, so.
There you go. Awesome, great. So let's see. Go back here. The property tax increase at my house this year and this year was $700 a year because they took out the homestead exemption. I blurred out my home from Google Street View for security purposes. Should I take a picture? Should I take a picture that are required and supply print film? What would that suffice, or would that suffice?
The only picture that we would need would be if they're going to show any kind of damages. Our appraisers, when they go out to the property, what they like to do, or what we require or ask them to do, is to take just a snapshot of the front of the house for identification purposes. The first thing that we do when Eric comes in and protests his property, we want to show him a picture and make sure we were looking at the right house. But as far as a specific picture, I mean, from a homeowner, the only reason I would see them needing to do that would be to show damages of the property, or anything to help reduce their property valuation. But yes, specifically of their home.
Yeah, if you just did a complete remodel, don't show us that one.
No, we don't want to.
Right. You'll get that eventually. Jennifer asked, what if you have a person in your home who's over 65 and disabled? Do they need to be listed on the deed, I'm assuming?
In order to qualify for an over 65 exemption, it has to be their principal place of residence, and obviously they have to be the owner of the property. I took care of my mom for a long time before she passed, and so even though she was over 65, I wasn't eligible for that exemption just because she lived there. So unfortunately, no. I know there's at least one or two bills working their way through the legislature right now that are trying to extend some sort of an additional exemption benefit for folks that are taking care of the elderly, or folks that are ill or disabled, even young children. So don't know if that's going to pass or not, but I know it's in the works.
Now, if somebody has a disabled veteran, 100% disabled veteran at their home, and they go have a rent, like a property somewhere else, can they do an over 65 at that location, or no? It's just
like the homestead. It's your primary principal place of residence. One thing I forgot to say about the over 65 exemption, let's say that you hit the lottery, Eric, and you decide you want to upgrade. And so if you're paying taxes, let's say you're paying on 50% of what your tax bill should be if you weren't over 65. Well, you could upgrade to a bigger home, a more valuable home, or whatever the case may be. That 50% ratio is transferable from one property to the next if you decide to sell that house and move to the next house. Conversely, if you decide to downsize, that same ratio that you're paying on the qualified home would apply to your new property as well. It would come off the property that you sold and simply be transferred to the next property. And that can go anywhere in Texas. Yeah, that happens all the time. We see these neighborhoods that crop up, and they're surrounded by other neighborhoods, and they're infringing on older neighborhoods. And I know it's happened in my neighborhood. And so, those don't really have anything to do with one another. I mean, they may be in the same physical location, but they're clearly not the same neighborhood. In the inner city of San Antonio, and I generally call that anything inside of 410, particularly in the Alta Vista, Tobin Hill, Southtown, we may have 3 or 4 different neighborhoods within one neighborhood, because we have the homes that are 70 to 100 years old, and then we have those that are 70 to 100-year-old that have a 20-year-old life effective age simply because they've been renovated. And then we have the flipper market. And then in some areas, we have the SAHA, the San Antonio Housing Authority, building deed restricted houses on a lot by lot basis. So they may not even be connected, but they're similarly deed restricted to certain income brackets. So we're accustomed to having to track multiple markets within the same general vicinity.
And Eric, before we move on, that's one of the things that on our evidence packet, when we send you that sales, it also has the year built, because we do not want to compare y'all. And is this the Vista that's on 1604 in Judson?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so we want to make sure that we're looking at what's going on in your neighborhood, because that's an established neighborhood. We're not going to compare your valuations to something that was built 2010, 2020, you know what I mean? It's apples to oranges. So that's a very good question, and we want to make sure that we're looking at homes that are in that neighborhood.
Gotcha. Chris says, my electrical is almost 50 years old, while new homes have upgrades. Can that be included in my protest?
Basically anything you want to include in your protest can and should be included in your protest. The fact of the matter is, Chris, is when you sit there and look at your home, we need to look and see what other homes in your neighborhood are selling for and whether or not they were upgraded before they sold. Not every home that sells is upgraded. Not every home that sells isn't upgraded. We track those individually so that we try to keep up with, I don't like the term flipper, but sometimes they're flippers, sometimes they're just remodeled. But the fact of the matter is we want to compare your home to similar properties. And obviously, if you have 50-year-old electrical, there's probably going to have to be some renovation done to bring it up to code to make that property saleable. So by all means, make your case.
And we have a lot of those phone calls from those people that want to buy your home. It's constant pretty much.
Every day.
And going back to one of your other listeners that asked about how to make a better argument, when we send you that sales data, you can Google each address and you'll see interior pictures of those homes. So you want to make sure that if there's new granite countertops, crown molding, any kind of upgrades, then you bring pictures of your home and say, hey, look, even though it's the same neighborhood, this is my home and this is what, you know what I mean? So that's how you also bring in a good argument as far as showing that there is a difference between what's selling and what's not. And we'll try to focus our sales on the ones that haven't been renovated and to get a better idea, to make a better comparison.
Right, and appliances and
Absolutely.
ACs and all that mess that we will have to constantly, fix and replace. Betty says, where can I find a list of what the Class CD abbreviations mean? I have a metal workshop, and the abbreviation next to it says SB. Does that stand for siding and brick?
I believe so, but she can contact me after this, and I can look specifically for her. On the evidence package, we also have a legend that has the breakdown of all the codes and what they mean. But if she has a specific question now, she can call me after the meeting, and I'll be more than happy to look into that for you.
I protested my taxes last year. They denied. I live in Steuben Ranch and stated that I can't use the information from the neighborhood because my place is not connected with the whole community. I try to compare the value of my house with a house 3 blocks away, same SR complex. What can I use?
Without looking at the specifics, I don't know why we wouldn't use one that's 3 blocks if it's in the same Steuben Ranch. Now, I know that there's different areas of Steuben Ranch where there are different builders. Sometimes different builders have different upgrades, so that does affect the selling points. But still, if it's in the same neighborhood, I wouldn't see why we wouldn't have looked at that. Again, we can look at those individually. I'm more than happy to research that for you.
Jennifer says, if the person over 65 here permanently is the primary residence as listed on the driver's license, do they qualify or do they need to be on the deed? The response is not clear. Oh, she was the one who asked the question earlier.
Right, and so I apologize for not being clear. Clearly, the person who's over 65 that's claiming an over 65 exemption must be the owner of the property. Whether they are co-owners of the property, they obviously have to be listed on the deed in order to prove ownership of the property, and then they would have to be over 65, and then it would have to be their primary place of residence in order to qualify.
Charmaine asks, what if I have a two-bedroom home with no other home with 2 bedrooms in the neighborhood to compare to?
Yeah, that's a little bit tricky. It's kind of hard to say that because, my house actually has either 3 or 4 bedrooms, if you call that 4th bedroom, which is / an office, a bedroom or an office. It's the same. So, we would have to look at that, obviously. It's not as easy to determine that as it is when you convert a garage, for example. If you're in a neighborhood where everybody has a garage and all of a sudden you don't, you probably have done yourself more harm than good by the added square footage by making that conversion. But we just have to look at those facts individually and see if we can produce any sales or find any sales of comparably situated property. And there's all of our contact information.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I keep putting myself on mute. Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, there's a contact info. So if you need to ask any questions, contact them. Preferably, for any simple questions like the EPIN or anything else, try to contact BCAD directly on their phone number. And that's that number, that Customer Information and Assistance Department. Is there anything that you want to kind of clarify? Anything else before we complete this class?
Yeah, I do, Eric, if you don't mind. I just have one point to make is that, if the pandemic did any good from our office's standpoint, it forced us to think outside the box. So we were able to do more last year with our doors closed, still offer every resource, all of our services were still available to the public by keeping them safe. It forced us to look at the self-appointee system. It forced us to look at Zoom meetings, WebEx. Before the pandemic, we used to always hear, not only do I have to fight my value, or my taxes, but I have to take some time off of work. There's no parking, the traffic. You don't have to do none of that anymore. It's almost like Mike and I were talking about. I can't remember the last time I actually went into a bank lobby. Our phones, we can do everything now. So if you can still get your protest done, if you can still speak to one of our appraisers from the comfort of your home, where you can say, you know what, Friday at 1 o'clock, I want somebody to call me, we're going to call you. So we can do so much more now than we did before. Again, last year, 80,000 informals, we had a 94% settlement rate. I encourage people to protest so they can get the information. And if they look at the sales data and say, you know what, it went up, but the data's there, I feel I can live with that, no harm, no foul. But if you feel that you have some issues that you want to bring to our attention, by all means, this is the time that we can do that, so we can make that adjustment on the value to make sure that you're paying on something that you feel is fair and we feel is fair too.
Right. And Sepul says, if we do not agree with the decision of the protest, we don't have to accept it. we can appeal that decision? I think she's asking the question. Can we appeal that decision?
Yes, informally, like I said, out of the 80,000 informals that we had 94% that we settled with. Those other 6% they took the protest to the formal level before the appraisal review board. They'll make the determination based on the evidence that's presented from both sides. If you still don't agree with the determination from the appraisal review board, there is other avenues to continue the protest. You can go to district court and file a lawsuit, or you can go to binding arbitration. Now, there are costs attributed to that, but there are other avenues that they can proceed. And all that information will be sent to them on the board. When they get the determination letter from the appraisal review board, all the steps are in there.
Kathy asked, CPS is going to have to update our infrastructure this summer. Can we use that in an appeal?
That's really going to be a case-by-case basis. I kind of see that what CPS is doing, because we're part of our own grid here in Texas, cut off from the rest of the world by choice. The stuff that's going to have to be done to the grid, from what I can gather, is going to be more on a statewide basis. I don't know that it's going to necessarily just affect CPS. I kind of think if CPS was left to its own devices, we probably could have supplied San Antonio just fine. I think that they ended up having to peel off a lot of customers to share other areas that had completely gone dark. But that's just my thought as a ratepayer as well. I don't think it's going to be relevant, but I think we're all going to be subjected to it. That being said, the market continues to go up, up, and up. It was on the national news this morning. So the number one thing facing first-time home buyers is they're not used to having to be outbid.
Right, exactly. And just so everybody knows, this is the Bexar County Appraisal District website. In order to go to your online portal, you go to Online Services, Online Portal, click on that, and then this is where you will log in with your ePIN. If you don't have an ePIN, like we said earlier, you'll have to call and ask for an ePIN. So just don't worry about that. But you can also do it from the back of the appraisal form, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So this is where you'll have your username and password, and that's your ePIN there. So, well, thank you guys. I appreciate you coming on, and thank you for just educating the public and us for how to navigate this. And if anybody has any questions, please reach out to them directly. I'm just going to share the screen one more time again, just that way make sure that we have it. So if you need to contact, please contact the customer information and assistance department first. Try to get through that way. The website's there. If for some reason you still do have a bigger issue, you can contact Michael or Rogelio as well. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you just taking the time to come out here. But thank you, everyone. Stay tuned. Keep protesting your taxes. Ask any questions to BCAD if you need to. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Y'all have a good day.